Yeah.
How did that help you prepare you for the rest of the things that you're doing now? Because isn't that a very key skill that you needed to learn?
It was an incredibly key skill. And I think it's the skill that I see most, entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs lack. They don't know how to sell. And sales is almost like this dirty word because people conjure up a picture of a salesperson who's trying to persuade them or convince them or pressure them into something that they don't want, when actually that's not what real sales is. Real sales is actually finding out what people want and showing them how to get it and finding a good match. Well, at 17 years old, I just was excited to have a job where I made some money. And so it wasn't something that I thought was going to be any type of a career. And ultimately, I guess all businesses sell products. So in a way, it has become a career for me.
Well, welcome to the podcast. Nathan Newberry here, your host. Super pumped to have Tim Ryan on the show here with us. Before I introduce him and go through his story, I want to give you a plug of just giving you a free resource. Down below in the show notes, I have a full training of how to help people build authority online, how to build sales teams, how to be able to get leads for traffic. So if you're interested in that, download that. It's a free gift I want to give you before we jump into the episode here. But Tim, super pumped that you're here. Glad we're able to go through this podcast. Before we jump into your story and what you do to help people, I want to really kind of just get your really quick synopsis of how you think high performance. What does that mean to you? How does that really go around in your head and your mindset? How do you apply that to your life?
Yeah. High performance for me, I think, begins with knowing your mission. Like if you know what you're working towards, then that gives speed. When you don't know where you're going, I think that you tend to slow down. So when you have a clear mission, you have a clear objective, then you can start to go fast. And then it's all about velocity. How do I get the velocity? And sometimes it's not the hours you put in, it's the work you put into the hours. And so for me, high performance is all about knowing what you want and then driving at it at a very high rate and then eliminating noise. I think focus is when you remove all the distractions, what's left is focus. And so focused on those initiatives. And then for me, I think high performance is also the person that they can also relax. And so when they're not working on their mission, when they're with their family, when they're with their friends, they can just kind of put it to the side, just relax, be chilled. And so to me, it's an energy that you bring as well as it's a clarity that you have. And that's, I think, about high performance.
I love that. Now, Tim, you're a serial entrepreneur. Tell our audience here of what you do, because you have a coaching company, you have some other companies too. Tell us what people know about you. What is that?
Yeah, so I'm the founder and CEO of Blue Swipe, and at Blue Swipe we help businesses process payments. The way that we find our customers is actually usually through partnerships. We will partner with B2B companies, whether that's a software company, a financial institution, or any organization that has businesses as their client, and we'll help them launch their own credit card processing solution. We'll label and white label everything under their names. That way it's something specific to their business, and it's not even really carrying on the identity of Blue Swipe if they don't want it to, though we can still leave that in there, and we'll make it work for their users. But what it does is it gives their customers a really fair pricing model, something that's going to be really transparent. They can use our customer support teams for everything. And now it's a new revenue stream. So that's Blue Swipe. And then along the way, I really found that my passion was helping entrepreneurs, the people that were just like myself one time, that they wanted to start a business. And so I had a mentor along the way that really had guided me. He had organized a group of entrepreneurs, and from that has now become what's called Your Life Ventures. And we're a community of very vision and purposeful entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs. We help predominantly employees become entrepreneurs, and we teach them how to do that in a 2 to 5 year model where you don't have to just abruptly quit your job or go hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, but rather be able to do that in a way where you can build a business that aligns with your values and maybe eliminate some of the risks that a lot of traditional business models handles.
I love that. So many times people have one thing, but so many times people need to be coaching. People need to be sharing what they do and their success. So I'm glad that you're able to leave some nuggets and legacy along the way there. But tell me at the very beginning, Tim. Yes, totally.
Yeah.
And from the very beginning, Tim, bring us back to the moment that you knew you were a little bit different, because at the start of this, you probably had some big challenges along the way. Tell us a little bit about the very beginning, what this all kind of started out with.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I've begun to really look back at my past and realize that it's what prepared me for entrepreneurship. And the more business owners I've met, the more oftentimes I've heard a similar story, though it's not exclusive. I definitely find it is a commonality. And that is that I grew up in a lot of chaos growing up. And I had a great childhood, had amazing parents. They've actually been married for over 45 years today, which I think is an incredible feat, given that I've been married for 3 years and we have a little guy at home now. So I can know how difficult it can be. But thankfully, my parents have been together for a very long time. However, growing up, there's a lot of instability. My dad was climbing the corporate ladder. He got laid off twice. He also changed jobs 2 times, and then 2 times he got laid off. And so what that resulted in is we ended up moving 6 different times over the course of about a decade. So I always say it taught me 2 things pretty young. One was I did get pretty good at packing a moving truck. So he learned the game of Tetris there. And it was a lot of fun, honestly. I liked to, go into a new city and making new friends. But it also taught me there was, not necessarily guarantees when you have a corporate position and someone else is kind of writing your paycheck. They can also stop writing your paycheck. And so I was pretty young when I decided I wanted to start some type of a business, something that could give me control. So I was pretty early in that journey. And then the other thing that I think kind of prepared me for entrepreneurship was amidst all those moves was a lot of marital instability for my parents. I think mom went through her own kind of emotional challenges. Some of it was just practical. My dad was gone a lot. He had jobs typically where he traveled like 3 nights a week. Typically a week out of the month at least he would be gone on the road for his different positions. And of course, he's got 3 young kids at home. So he's trying to, provide for them. He wants to make a living. But then that left my mom there to basically, raise myself and 2 siblings almost like a single mom. And I saw what that did. And then when he'd be home, there was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of financial struggles because of the layoffs that they underwent. And so early on, I grew up in a world I realized I was a little different. My parents, they fought a lot. So we didn't have a lot of friends over, which made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. We moved a bunch of times. So we didn't have a lot of close relationships that we grew up and down the street. And I'm not looking for any violins here or sob stories, but what I've realized is that was actually the preparation I needed to become a business owner. I had to learn how to manage instability. I had to learn how to make new friends quickly. I had to learn how to solution seek at times when things that maybe other kids were experiencing weren't there. The table wasn't always set at 6 p.m. There wasn't a dinner table around the family, which I think is almost uncommon today. And so these things started to teach me skills and a mentality that later I would apply to entrepreneurship and had a really impactful it really prepared me. And I think that also at the same time, next to that pain of instability and that pain of maybe not having my parents around was actually my deepest purpose, because I wanted to be able to help other parents. I wanted to be able to help other individuals have more control, make the finances that would allow them to support their family, and in a way kind of maybe escape some of that for someone else who, if they didn't have the right resources or the right opportunities, they just want to be able to have it.
Yeah.
So, and it still gets me emotional today to think about, but like that became the driving force. And I think at first it was almost maybe not healthy, because I ended up working like 70, 80 hours a week when I first started my first business. I ended up being homeschooled for high school, finished when I was 17. And when normally kids would be going off to college, I decided to take that year and decide what my major was going to be. And I started working for a payments company. Small little company. It had 4 or 5 employees, and they had a small agency they were getting off the ground. And what they had me doing was calling up business owners over the phone. It was an $8 an hour job. This wasn't anything glamorous. It was cold calling, but that was my entry point into a position that would introduce me to both payments as well as talking to small business owners. And what that did was also kind of start to build into me some of the entrepreneurial skill sets I'd have. But I think today that's where I've realized that most of the experiences we have, even if they're negative, a lot of times that is the preparation we need, that one day when the real opportunity shows up, we've got this whole archive of experiences and setbacks and failures and sometimes solution seeking that's now prepared us to enter it.
And jumping into this real quick, if you haven't reviewed, if you haven't liked or subscribed, make sure you do that. I want to make sure that more people hear Tim's story and more great people in this episode. So make sure to do that. Tim, I love that you brought this up, because so often, like, what I hear is most of the time people think like the origin story is just for a few, but it's for most. Most people have some crazy challenges in life. I remember the line in the sand moments that I was dealing with at the very beginning of entrepreneurship where I failed most of the time, and then I remember my wife at that point, she was like, "Hey, I'm pregnant. If you can't figure out how to make more money for us, you need to go like get another job." And I know internally that was soul crushing if I had to go do that. And I knew I needed to do the right thing. And something too that jumped out at me is, and most great people, they all start at learning the skill of sales. And that's what you did.
Yeah.
How did that help you prepare you for the rest of the things that you're doing now? Because isn't that a very key skill that you needed to learn?
It was an incredibly key skill. And I think it's the skill that I see most, entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs lack. They don't know how to sell. And sales is almost like this like dirty word because people conjure up a picture of a salesperson who's trying to persuade them or convince them or pressure them into something that they don't want, when actually that's not what real sales is. Real sales is actually finding out what people want and showing them how to get it and finding like a good match. Well, at 17 years old, I just was excited to have a job where I made some money. And so it wasn't something that I thought was going to be any type of a career. And ultimately, I guess all businesses sell products. So in a way, it has become a career for me. However, what you started to learn as I'm calling up these businesses in Arkansas, and I'm, of course, trying to make a sale, get them to be on the phone with me, is that you're getting people slamming the phone on you. And so I had to start figuring out, like, how do I get people to not just like hang up on me? What are the things I can do with maybe the way that I'm starting the conversation? If I start off with something really long, then it's not going to be effective. And that, okay, well, what's the point of that? Well, then you start looking at marketing, and a lot of marketing emails go unread because people just make them too boring and too long. And so then you start looking at, okay, well, how do I say something that's really poignant, that's really, that's going to get to the root of the thing that they want? And then I started realizing, as I started to, build websites and build some of the technologies we have, well, if I have a website that doesn't have a compelling landing page, people are going to bounce from that immediately.
Yeah.
So these early sales skills were actually the things that prepared me to understand marketing, to understand what made people buy. I couldn't sell the features. I had to sell the benefits. I started learning initial benefit statements, IBS, we started to call them, where like, what's the initial benefit statement that I can share that's about the other person? Because other sales is not about the revenue of the sales rep. It's about the customer. I started realizing the customer was the hero of the journey. I started learning preparation. What could I do to be prepared for it? Like all these things that then later just fed into the rest of my career. And truthfully, if I didn't have that experience, I don't think I would have made it as an entrepreneur. I would have probably tried, not understood why people weren't buying the product, blame the economy, blame the product, blame my team, whatever it might be, and it wouldn't have worked. And so sales, I think, is fundamental for every business because every business sells a product. Now, it doesn't mean you always have to be the one-on-one person that's exchanging that product with the customer, but if you don't understand what makes people buy, you're not going to be able to have a company that's going to sell products. So,
and you had to learn that,
Nathan, but that was my experience with it.
Yeah. And you had to learn this even growing up, having to go into a different school and introduce yourself, make friends. Like that's not easy. Most of the time people want to be comfortable in their shell or they just become a loner. But really you had to dive into this like for a long time, moving, positioning, everything like that. So that made you adapt really well with becoming someone that's likable. And that's really key too with, sales and in life. Like you had to, go pursue, your wife now. It's like, well, what did that look like? You had to be likable. You had to be this person that was able to sell them on marrying you. You had to, now you have, a little guy, you have to convince them to do what they need to do. There's elements of sales that goes into a lot of things. And I love that the origin story kind of prepared you, not only learning that skill that you're using now as a profession, but you're also you leaned into your personal life too, which is so helpful. And then marketing and sales, they overlap, right? And so now you're realizing, hey, what's a convincing marketing style of things that you have to learn in your business? What about the other two that I bucket in with everything? So it's like there's 4 buckets in entrepreneurship that I look at. There's the sales, the marketing, then you got the fulfillment that you have, and then the other 4th one is looking at the leadership, or knowing how to systemize your business or automations, teammates, all that type of stuff. How is that leaned into with your past Was that a weakness or a deficit that you had of like learning how to do the fulfillment or even how to build teams? Or is that something that you're always on a quest to learn and grow in?
Yeah, I think with the fulfillment side, this is something I actually learned from Brian Chesky, and I'll tie it back to my past in a moment. But I remember him saying that at Airbnb, they tried to architect like this crazy experience, like what would be the most ideal customer experience. And they would just start taking it up a level and up a level. And they use that exercise as a way to figure out what they wanted to have at Airbnb. And so we started like doing the same thing. We started looking at, okay, what is a customer experience at Blue Swipe that would make that customer say like, this is absolutely unreal. They'd want to tell all their friends. They never want to leave you. They would want to give you a review. They would want to give you multiple reviews. And so it was like something that we could start to whiteboard out and say, okay, well, what's like the most amazing experience we could give that we would want to get if I was the end user? And I think that was the thing that we started with is like, okay, what would be the experience that we would want? And then you eventually look at, okay, well, what's practical? But initially it was like, well, what if like we actually went and saw the equipment? Like you had like an in-person delivery system for that. Like that'd be pretty cool. It's like, okay, let's do that. Well, what if like when the customer said, hey, I want to do this, like they actually met the service team that was going to provide that service. Like, okay, that's a good idea. And then they set up a delivery that would be very convenient to the business owner. And then someone came out and they actually made sure everything was running. Maybe they trained the employees. What if we had a follow-up call like a week later, maybe a month later? What if we remembered like little details around them that made them realize that we actually thought they were really important? Like maybe their birthday, and we send them like a birthday card. What if we send them an anniversary card or a business anniversary card? We started thinking about those things. We said, well, what if like every time the business owner needed to use their equipment, like we literally had one of our employees go and like actually like ring up the transactions for them? What if like we picked them up from the airport every time they came home? And obviously some of these things are like, okay, well, we can't do that, that's impossible. So
Yeah.
like we can't have like people riding on a circus around their building like chanting their name. Like so, but what it did was it started to make this fun exercise of like, what can we do to blow people's minds? I think so many times when it comes to customer experience, people don't think about like, how do we just like blow their mind, create that wow experience like Zappos used to talk about, leave them with something that says like, I can't believe someone's even doing this. And by using that as a framework, we actually did start implementing like more than half of the things that we just talked about. And we have a net promoter score now in the 90s, and we're very proud of that. But we were able to create that because we're always architecting how do we just create this amazing experience that we would want. So how that ties back to my past, I think that whenever I go to a new school system, I'd want to build new friends. And so therefore you'd want to figure out like, well, how do I like wow these people who don't know me from anywhere and make them think that like I'm a cool person that would want to hang out with them too. And whether it was remembering little details or maybe being interested in things they were interested in, like you really started to think creatively at a way that would then allow you to start to build new relationships. That if I had the same friends since I was in second grade, they've known me, they probably would expect me to just be whoever I was and not really push to grow. And so it actually did create, I think, a lot of foundations. And I mean, team building and leadership is probably like a whole nother topic, but I don't know if you want me to dive into that, but that's definitely been a journey in and of itself that has some challenges along the way.
It's definitely not easy to do, but it's a whole nother skill set that it's so many times people miss. And that's why they stay wannapreneurs or solopreneurs, or where there's a ceiling of learning that they just don't know how to grow past. Where if they try to add an EA or a VA or some person on their team, then it goes sideways and they're like, I'm never doing it again. I knew some old bosses of mine growing up that just stayed that, and they were working 80 hours a week, and that just became a norm. But then their families weren't the best, or the business never lasted because of not knowing that skill of leadership and delegation and knowing how to empower people. Maybe that is another topic that we touch on later, Tim, because you do have a coaching business as well. I want to kind of hit on with how you help people, because there's the stages of growth. You say 2 to 5 years. I think you help walk people through that journey of entrepreneurship. And I saw a really interesting, statistic. I think it was yesterday, where it was like 9% of people, at least maybe I think it was in the North America, that actually ventured to start a business. 9%. I don't know where those stats were, but it just blew my mind. The fact that we're having this conversation right now, that we're one of a small amount of people that actually took that venture to actually have its own business entirely just doing that. Maybe there's a lot of people that with an Etsy account or something, and they call it their business, but really they're just, employees with, a little side hustle. That I think it's just, maybe that statistic you just come in with, that's all they do is that one business, which is really interesting. But to get to that point of having their own business is a whole nother thing. And the step to do hard things. Tell me a little bit about your quest to building out this coaching program that you have and how you help people really dive into some of these things that they have to really kind of build out.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I think, belief blockers that keeps people from starting their own business. And some of it's basic from the standpoint of there's not like really a clear path of like step 1, step 2, step 3. In fact, sometimes when people go down this road, they focus on things that aren't necessary, but not necessarily important. Like, okay, let me get a business license. Let me get a logo. Let me set up like a website. And those things are all needed. But at its core, there's other things that are actually a lot more important. Like, what is the product and the offer that you're bringing to the marketplace, et cetera. So I think when I got experience of having a mentor and a guide, it was so empowering. And it also showed me that with my first 3 businesses, though we did have a degree of success in them, for a lot of the time that I was building that business, I was spinning my wheels. I didn't know how to train people. I didn't know how to hire people. I didn't know how to scale. I didn't know how to market. And so I spent a lot of time trying to learn everything the hard way. And I was resourceful. I would listen to podcasts. I would read books, and those things definitely helped. But when I found that there could be like a real relationship or a true guide that I could have, someone who was going to give me a blueprint I could follow, the ability to go fast was actually, it was mind blowing. It was incredible to see, okay, I can go so much exponentially faster if I follow in the footsteps of somebody else has already done it. Mm-hmm. And so I started seeing the value of mentorship. At the same time, when I started my first, business, I was basically a teenager. Like I didn't have anything to lose. All my businesses that I went all in on, I was very young. I was in my 20s. When I started now Blue Swipe, I wasn't married. I had really no responsibilities. I didn't have any kids. And so the idea of like starting a business, quitting your job, investing your life savings, and going at it with full tilt with really no guarantee that it's going to succeed feels more risky. Mm-hmm. Now you could actually look at a lot of the stats on the ability to unemployment, inflation rates, job markets. That could actually say that having a job is actually pretty risky as well. There's risk on both sides. However, I realized there was a model that could take place where someone could start a business and they would have the ability to start building revenue, building skill sets. They don't need to quit their job. They can start learning without having to take on the risk. And if it's the right business that doesn't require a lot of capital, you can actually do this and let all the income you're generating from it just be house money. And if it's not growing as fast as you'd like, you can kind of go back to the drawing board. Well, we're having a mentor, having a community comes into play is if you're with a community of people that are all doing the same thing that you're doing, and some of which are dramatically farther along than you are, then that's going to be the fastest way to get there, because it's going to take and remove so many of the fears that hold you back, these belief blockers, as I call them. A big thing I learned was that if I wanted to do anything, but especially entrepreneurship, I had to take advice from people that were closest to my goals, not necessarily closest to me. My parents, my friends, a lot of my friends and my family members, many of them were not entrepreneurs. And so if I wanted to actually have a business that I could start, scale, and build, and eventually buy my time back, I needed to take advice from people that were in that situation. And even if they weren't the closest to me, if they were closest to my goals, that was the information I needed. And that's one of the things I see wrong is people take advice from people who don't have what they want in life. And then those people are not going to empower you to do something that they've never done.
Right.
And if it is, it's going to be very generalized. And we do this in every area of life. If I want to become a surgeon, I'm not going to go to my dad, who's not a surgeon, by the way, and say, "Hey, how do I become a surgeon?"
Yeah.
I'm gonna go to someone who is a surgeon and get their advice on it. And we do this in every area of our lives. But I find we typically don't do it with personal finance. And if we're stepping into a new arena like business, a lot of times we go to the people closest to us that we know care about us, but might not be able to help us. And so having a community, having a mentor, then all of it becomes clear, because then you build a relationship with them. And then through that relationship, it becomes obvious what next steps to take, what decisions to make. The roadmaps become a little bit more obvious. So there's a lot that goes into it. But I think that's been the key, is like getting around people that have already done it to remove whatever belief blockers are kind of holding you back. So that way you can make the progress you want.
There was this story I heard that there was this guy, I can't remember exactly who it was, but he was on stage and he was asking the audience, and they were saying, okay, how much do you guys want to make? And they were like $1 million. And so he put $1 million on the board. And then he was like, how much are you making right now? And she's like, $50,000. You're like, okay, you're really missing out then $950,000 of dumb tax that you have of not making $1 million. So every year you're paying $950,000 just because you're deciding not to know and learn how to do what you need to do to make $1 million, which is really, it's the opposite view, like we're saying, of someone that's even at a job. They're like, hey, I'm making a comfortable living. But realistically, it's like to pursue your dream and your venture and the growth that you want, you're on the other side of making $1 million. And Jim Rohn also talks about this quite a bit, in his stuff, right? The old, motivational guy, where he was just talking about where it's like, it's really important to, set goals and limits of what you would have to become to be a millionaire. Right. Because his, show, his mentor talking about, it's like, who do you need to become to really be the millionaire? And so there's the elements of skills and education that you need to learn with it. And like you're saying, it's like, you got to buy down your dumb tax or ignorance tax by investing in mentorship. How much of that have you applied in your life? Because I know Brian Tracy, he always talks about this too. It's like 10% of your finances toward education. Like, has that been something that you've applied to your life? Talking about finances, being in the financial world, have you applied or like diligently looked at with personal development?
Yeah, it's funny because we didn't talk about this topic, but it's actually some prior to the show, that is, but it is a topic I'm actually incredibly passionate about. And I know I've shared a bit of my origin story. Well, when I was 17 and I knew I didn't want to do what my parents did of just going to the corporate world, I literally went to the internet and Googled how to make more money. Now, I'm going to date myself now. This is like 2006. So there was not a lot of productive things that came up, but I ended up finding this PDF you could buy online by this gentleman who claimed to have a lot of financial success. And it was $45. Now, mind you, I was 17. So $45 might as well have been $10,000. But I thought about it overnight and I came back, and this was my thought. I was thinking to myself, most people spend tens of thousands of dollars going to college. What is $45? It's a drop in the bucket. I bought the PDF and I'm so glad I did. It changed my life because it taught me two things. First thing it taught me was the power of mentorship. He didn't even have a mentoring program or anything like that, but he said that he paid a mentor $50,000 a year to give him advice on what he did with his life and business. And I thought that idea was crazy, but it was one of the biggest things that he shared. Second thing he shared in the PDF was that if you wanted to be wealthy, you had to pay for the best advice out there. And he said that poor people would be the ones who would seek out free information, whereas wealthy people sought out the best information, which normally you'd have to pay for.
Yeah.
And so I took that and I started realizing that if I wanted to get great information, I likely would have to pay for it, but just be okay with that cost. As long as it taught me how to make more money, it would ultimately it would work out. Then I learned Brian Tracy's 10% principle, and I started applying it. And the first year I did that, it was like the scariest thing I ever did. And lo and behold, next year, I like almost doubled my income.
Yeah.
I did it again the next year from that. And I didn't double my income, but it grew significantly. And then I felt pretty good. So I stopped doing it. Mm-hmm. You know what happened? My income didn't grow. In fact, it started declining a little bit.
Wow.
And then I remembered, like, wait a second, I'm not doing the principle. And so today we literally spend, we were adding it up, like in 2024, we probably spent over $65,000 on coaching and mentoring.
Yeah.
In fact, my wife and I spend money for mentorship in every area of our life. We even have a sleep coach for our son. True story, by the way, is for all my parents. Our son would wake up every 2 hours, and we could not figure out why. Throughout the night, he would always be waking up. And we tried everything. We read blogs, we read books. We couldn't figure out what it was. We hired a sleep coach. She gave us a plan, and the first night he slept through the night.
Yeah.
And it was like $600 for this sleep coach. And long story short, I was like, that is the best $600 I've ever spent. Yeah. So whether it's getting the baby to sleep or if it is actually growing a business, I think wealthy people pay for the best advice and poor people search for free advice. And I've learned to just always pay the price for it. And it's always worked out in my case.
Yeah. Now, what are some things that you had to adapt in your life? Like as you grew up, a 17-year-old, even that young age, pursuing growth is pretty wild. Because I feel like that's a really young age even to pursue growth and having that mindset. So kudos to you in that. But there's some things that you had to like adapt to, some habits you had to create, some principles you had to like create and anchor in with your values and how you make decisions and putting and making decisions through those different filters. What are some of those things that you had to cut out or add or really kind of build up to be the person of success you are now?
Yeah, I mean, I think I went through that in a more like in a very organic way, like trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to focus on now? What do I need to do? And then over time, I started realizing there's a very simple framework that you can follow that can help guide your actions. It's actually what I have now coined the V3 strategy. And it first, again, starts with clarity. Like when you have a very clear vision, that's literally the first V, then that's going to be the target you're aiming towards, which a vision is not just like having a new car or having a house. It's like, what is the happiness you want to have in your life? What do you want your marriage to be like? What do you want? And what do you want the day-to-day life to look like? And then have you align that vision with your values? For most people, they're going to talk when it comes to values around their faith, maybe their family. That could be both their spouse or maybe their children. What's the legacy they want to leave? You know, the future that they want to leave the world. What do they want to do for their health? Right? What's their fitness, and how are they aligning things with that? What's the fun that they're having, and how are they building a life that's good? Not going to be something they want to escape from or vacation from, but they're really building this ideal life. So once you have that clearly identified, as well as you can, I think it's always evolving. That becomes what I call your destination. And then the steps that I've now learned from the hard way, as well as from having some great mentors in my life, is the next step is to find an association of people that actually are living that life. If they are, if they are closer to that goal, or hopefully have already done some of the things you want to achieve, that needs to be the group of people you need to get around. And then from there, you have to figure out what is the sacrifice, what is the investment that you need to make in order to start living like those people. And that's going to ultimately get me to my third V, which is what's the vehicle? There is going to have to be some type of a vehicle. It's a mission, a calling, a business, a job. There's something that's going to help you that's going to help you get to that place that is going to be your vision and values. And for me, of course, it was entrepreneurship. It was starting my own business. Well, when you have that, I think where mentorship comes into play is if I use my vehicle analogy, you don't know how to drive your car. So a mentor is like it's like your driving coach, right? It's going to be the person that's going to help you drive the vehicle. But along the way, you'll start realizing, if I want to drive this car fast, what are the things that are maybe slowing me down? What are the things that are not getting me closer to my goals? So if there's something that maybe is taking time or money away from me, but it's not helping me get to this vision and values that I've already outlined, do I even need to be doing it? Do I, and that could be something like video games. It could be something like watching too much TV. It could be a variety of different topics that we could start to talk about, that it's like, is that really helping me? And like my wife and I, we actually don't drink. I quit drinking back in, 2016, I think it was the last time I drank. And I just realized, number one, I probably need to keep all the brain cells I have. But number two, if that's not really helping further me or get me closer to my goals, like, why even do it? Like, let me just focus on, having a good sleep routine, having a good healthy diet, focus on my vision, my values. And I've actually found I have better relationships when I don't drink, because it allows me to just spend more time connecting and less time drinking. So I'm not against drinking, by the way. I have lots of friends that drink, that kind of joke about me not doing it. But it's just that it was that mentality of like, what is in the way of this vision?
Yeah.
What is in the way of my values? How do I live those out every single day? And I think that happiness comes from living a life in the alignment of your values. So it's like, how do I do that? And then you eliminate the things that are not getting you closer to it.
And I think that's such a good perspective, because most of the time when people think about growing in their life, they think about what they need to add. But realistically, more often than not, it's like, what do you need to prune and cut out of your life? And I live in the orchards in Washington, where we have a bunch of pear trees and apple trees around it. It's the apple capital of the world in this Wenatchee Valley area. And so my backyard is flooded with all these orchards around us. But at the springtime, even in the winter a little bit right now too, is they're hacking the trees. They're taking all the extra limbs and they're trimming it up, and it almost looks like it's a dead tree during the winter, right? And even the spring before it starts budding, right? But that's what we got to look at, and especially during this time in January, when we're recording this. We're at the beginning of the year, which is really good to start thinking about what do I need to eliminate more than what do I need to add? Because it's going to give you more space to create. Because more often than not, more of the times it's just congestion pile of nonsense. It's like going into your room or your desk and it's all messy. And you're like, I just got to add more books. And before you know it, you can't even be efficient enough to really even look at your life clearly or even what you need to accomplish. So I love that perspective because I think that's so important in taking stock of where you're at in life before actually moving forward. Tim, I've loved our conversation and I want people to be able to reach you and connect with you further. What are some ways that people can find you online to connect further with you?
Yeah, totally. Well, probably the best way is just to just add me on Instagram. Handles Tim Ryan Life, and send me a DM. If you're looking for a great sleep coach for your baby, let me know. I can make a recommendation, as well as I do have a document that talks about your V3 strategy. And so if you're trying to figure out, okay, what's my vision? What are my values? Just send me a DM and say V3 and I'll send it over to you. And I think that's a great way for someone to start to get that in line. But we're definitely looking to grow our Instagram following. So that's probably the best way. Though I'm also on LinkedIn, and also for business, goblueswipe.com is our website.
Perfect. I'll make sure to put all those things down in the show notes for everybody. And before we jump to the next episode here, don't forget to grab that connection with you if you wanted some training on how to build an online influence, knowing how to do sales and marketing. Some of those training down below, there's a good link there that's going to allow you to be able to grab that connection as well. Well, until next time, thank you for being on the podcast and listening in. We will see you on the next episode.